So, guys, you must have noticed how Netflix nails it every time. You watch one thriller, and suddenly the topics that evolves. They learn your taste and refine endlessly, and keeping you glued out by chance. But a smart system of data loops, user signals, and adaptive algorithms. That system thinking. It decodes how every tweak ripples through users, features, and business outcomes, designed just for that interconnected whole. And that magic happens. That's where the magic happens, right? So today we will unlock it, mapping those links, predictive waves, building designs that live and breathe. In just 1 hour, Hari Krishnan, an user experience analyst, he will unpack this vast topic with crystal clarity.
Thank you, Yuva. And let me start with the story. In the late 2000s, a group of researchers who were trying to find a sustainable source of iron for villagers in rural Cambodia who had this iron deficiency anemia. So they went there and then they tried giving them supplements, uh, iron supplements, but that didn't work because, it had a lot of side effects. It was expensive. The logistics was difficult, and most important of all, people had to remember to take this pill every time. So people weren't compliant. And then they realized that, if you actually cook using iron cookware, that would help because the iron would leach into your food and that would give them the necessary nutrition that they needed. But then iron cookware was heavy and it was also expensive. And it wasn't, the villagers were used to the aluminum pots that they use, which were lighter and more readily available. Then these researchers thought, why not? Let's use this scrap iron or scrap metal and let's turn them into these iron discs. And if the villagers put them into their pots or pans while they're cooking, this iron would still leach out into the food and give them their necessary nutrition. And this proved to be scientifically sound. And whenever they tested this or tried it out, it was successful. People's iron levels were improving. But still, people were reluctant to do that because who wants to put a disk of iron in their food while they're cooking? So why did that fail? Then they kept trying and they did multiple iterations, and finally they landed on the shape of a fish. Because in Cambodian culture, this fish was the symbol of luck, and this resonated with the people, and they were no longer, dependent on remembering to take some pill or place some obscure piece of metal in their food. It started being integrated with their beliefs, and every time they saw the health benefits of this, they could thank their lucky fish. And what changed here was the way the iron actually entered their system. Now let's listen to another story, something more relatable. Imagine you check into an old hotel and they give you a room on the first floor. And then you're tired, so you decide to take a hot, relaxing shower, and you go into the bathroom and you turn the tap, and the hot water flows. You have a nice shower. It's all good, and then you go about your day, and then you come back, and then they tell you, so, there's something wrong with your room. There are some repairs on your first floor. We moved you to the top floor of the hotel. So you go there, and you've had a long day. You decide to unwind and relax, and you go into the bathroom and you turn the tap for the hot water, but then nothing happens. So you're confused and you turn it a bit more, and still nothing happens. It's still cold water. And then you're confused and then you turn it all the way back. But then suddenly piping hot water pours down on you. And then now you scream and you turn it back, and now it's suddenly cold. And then you keep fiddling with the knob to get the right temperature. And you think that what is wrong with this plumbing? What is wrong with this tap? And then when you check out, you let them know, see, hey, something's wrong with your plumbing. It's not working. It's all twisted. And they tell you, sorry about that. This is an old system. The hot water takes a while to actually flow up and actually get to your shower. So that's the delay that's causing um, this and that's what you experienced. And then you're like, you could have let me know this from the start. And then from then, the hotel decides to inform their guests on the top floor of this, at least until they find a more sustainable solution. Now let's look at a more everyday example. Notifications. We all get them throughout the day. And they started off with really good intentions of notifying the user when something happens. And that was very helpful at the start. But then what happened was more and more apps start being developed, more and more things that they wanted us to be notified of, alerts, messages, group chats, so many things. And then the number of notifications also increased. So as this began accumulating, something that was really helpful at first started to become annoying and a constant interruption in our daily lives. And then we started, maybe ignoring them or just swiping them away or even disabling or muting these notifications. And this would even cause us to miss important alerts that we need in our lives. And then they came up with features like do not disturb or focus modes to give back that control to the user. So they could be alerted on what was important based on their own terms. So now I just told you these three very different stories. And how does that relate to this talk? So in all these cases, the individual parts, all seem to be working fine. But when they are together, when they work together as a system, they start to fail. So in the Lucky Fish's case, they had the most viable solution. They could manufacture cheap, use scrap metal to manufacture these iron ingots, and that was sustainable. It worked. It was scientifically sound, but it just didn't connect with the people. And in the shower, all the water systems and the plumbing work like they're supposed to. Nothing was irrational about the way it worked, but the feedback structure was off. And each notification is also probably designed really well, and it's perfectly reasonable on its own. But when they start to accumulate together, they fail as a system. So this became apparent to me during an academic project where we were asked to design a bedroom automation system for Indian households. And at first, it was very exciting. We were told we could use all these different sorts of sensors that detect the light or motion or the presence of a human, temperature. And then you could have APIs to control these appliances and a fancy controller and integrate this with a mobile app and motors to move, curtains or windows, things like that. And we had all these fancy gizmos, and that was really exciting as someone starting off in design or building products. We jumped to a lot of ideas. We jumped to a lot of what could be's, or we thought that we could design a lot of cool things. But then a lot of these early ideas were based on the assumption that people would be actively managing their loans. When we actually then when we actually looked at the ground reality and we actually went to people's houses and stepped into their spaces, we realized that things were different. We had situations where you had two different people sharing a room, two or more people sharing a room, and they had different needs. And then the need, how people lived in cities was different from people living in towns or villages. And they had different schedules or routines. And some people, they have different preferences in temperature. Some people prefer it to be chilly all the time and they use the AC or the fan extensively. And some people like to keep their temperature controlled and they're maybe conscious of how they're consuming electricity. And then even how they use their spaces, different kinds of things. You could use it to watch movies or it's your office when you're working from home. You could use it as a reading space. When you have people over, that's different. Now, we had a thing where a parent was using her son's room as an office space because he was away at the hostel during that time. And she felt that the son's room was a better use of that space and it fit her idea of an office better. So people use their spaces differently, and then, how they managed issues like pests, or even their attitudes towards technology, or automation and all of that. So a lot of the houses I went to and the people I talked to, they had these Alexa Echo speaker devices, or something similar, a smart home speaker device. But they rarely ever used it. It was either stored away in some corner, put away, or at max it was used as a speaker, or maybe just for reminders or alarms or things like that. So what this allowed us to understand was the context of people's actual live spaces, how they actually, use their spaces. And then, over time, how people exhibit different behaviors, be it different times of the day or different times of the week. The weekend is different from the weekdays, and then over seasons across a year. So the idea of a room, or and how it behaves, also changes. It's not stable. It keeps changing throughout as you go through time. And then another thing was how people use and react to these systems over time, how their attitudes change. So, like in the example of the Alexa, what was meant to be used as a smart home device, and this thing was downgraded to just a speaker or a thing, or it wasn't even used in most cases. A lot of our early ideas were about controlling the different aspects of a room, the different appliances or different things. And constant control meant that users would get tired and they would lose their attention over time. And people would be wrestling with technology to get stuff done in their room. So, what we would be designing was just a glorified switchboard that people would eventually abandon, or they didn't understand how to use properly. So, we shifted our thinking to a more um, to a place where we wanted them to be comfortable. Rooms are places where we want a certain level of comfort based on what we're doing. So we thought of, having comfortable states or presets that they could set based on their use, and then they could change between them just like the flip of a switch. A switch was something they were, we're all used to. It's just on or off to change between how you want it to be. What we actually did here unknowingly at the time was understanding the system. We were visualizing and getting to know the diverse stakeholders, how they interact with each other, how they interact with the environment and the different elements in their environment, and how they reacted to this system over time. So, the real bedrooms are messy in real life. They keep changing. They're always changing, and they're not stable systems that you can just um, design for. So, what exactly is a system? You could think of it as a set of things interacting over time to produce an outcome. And this outcome depends less on any single part of the system and more on how they work combined or together. Right? So just remember, there's just a bunch of elements that are interconnected with each other. And when they work together, they produce a sort of outcome or a behavior. And that's all a system is. So we live in and around systems. Our own body is a system of different organs and cells working together to help us live and give us life. And otherwise, the transport systems in your cities is another example, or even the workplace that we work in, that's another system. So let's look at Airbnb as an example of a system at work. So what started out as a basic travel app and is now a household name. So Airbnb started out as a website for people to book short-term stays, or this was a classic bed and breakfast thing at a time when hotel markets were getting oversaturated. And this was how the interface of how one of their early websites looked like. And it looks like your run-of-the-mill travel app interface. You say where you want to go, when you want to check in, check out, guests, number of guests, and you search, and then you'd have a listing, and then you do that. And then it evolved into what it looks like today and what we know and use with this. And even right now, it's not largely very different. You could still draw parallels. You still you have this input where you select where you want to go, and then you have your listings of different stays. But what changed was the overall experience. It's not the same used to travel booking experience that you have. When you book an Airbnb, you book an Airbnb and you call it an Airbnb. And how they did this was by adopting a more holistic design approach. So how they did that was they started by shifting their focus to the trip or the journey that people have as being their primary product instead of, their app or website being their primary product. So that's the mindset they had when they were designing this. So it focused on a sense of belonging to the house that you're staying at, and the experience that we're having it, and the hospitality and the location you are staying at. It was more about something aspirational. So if you look at this highlighted text here, it says, charm, coziness, and the comforts of a lived-in home. Or the posh residential Upper East Side is known for its wealthy denizens, fancy restaurants along Madison Avenue. It's a pretty neighborhood. So what it's selling you is this sense of belonging, that you are a resident in this Upper East Side neighborhood, and you get to live like that for the duration of your stay. And everything sort of revolved around this central idea. And they even had, experiences curated around the local culture of the place and things like that. Another thing they did was they also focused on fostering the relationships and trust between the guests and hosts. Because when you have a system like this, where the key thing is you are, staying at another person's house and not like a huge chain of hotel that you can trust blindly, this thing becomes important. So, as a guest, you can view a profile of your host and how they're rated and their reviews. And then if you like the play, and then you can see a bunch of rules for their house, and you understand what they're looking for. And you sort of also start to understand who they are. And if this is a fit, then you initiate a booking. And when you do that, you have a conversation with the guest. And the when they do that, when somebody does that, the guest also sees, sorry, the host also sees a sort of profile of the guest, where, and based on their past reviews. So it's like a two-way communication channel. And the both parties start to communicate to find out if it works, if I want this person living here, if I want to live in this person's house, from both ends. And then towards the when your stay is over and your trip is complete, both parties are also encouraged to leave reviews, that you can see once, I think, both parties, both of you submit, or after a period of time, you can see each other's reviews as well. So over time, as this happens in different instances and over multiple interactions, this starts to build a loop of trust, that starts to reinforce itself, and also starts to regulate itself. And what I mean by that is, when this keeps happening over a period of time, it forces the hosts to be more hospitable, to keep their ratings high and to keep their stay at a good level. And then guests are encouraged to behave more well. You can't just do whatever, because that will affect you. And then throughout this, the bad actors are filtered out of the system, and that improves the matching and the rating. And that's what I mean by it becoming a self-regulating system. So now Airbnb is a holistic system of all these different things, the guests and the hosts and the house and the overall hospitality and the locations. So it wasn't just about a better booking flow or a better listing that helped it achieve that, right? Although those things are very important, what it uh, allowed was it for it to evolve into a more scalable and cohesive system, and that allowed them to be the globally successful brand they are today. And maybe if they didn't do that, they might have fizzled out or just remained just a regular travel platform. But sometimes, even when you consider the whole system and you feel like you've looked at the whole picture, there could be trade-offs, you know? So let's look at these um, icons here, or these logos, sorry. So these are Google's redesigned logos. And when these came out, um, a lot of people were complaining, these look too similar. They're hard to distinguish, and they all look like the same thing. So when you actually look at it on the interface of your phone, it's hard, or as a favicon on a website, it's hard to tell which one's which. And people kept mixing it up and they were upset. And one thing that actually really irked me when I was a student was when they changed the Google Authenticator logo. So, we had to use this to log into different services and accounts. And this was the old logo that, that I thought that was very beautiful. It has a nice G, the Google's G embedded in it. It looks like the lock to a safe and gives you that feeling of safety and security. And then now they've changed it to, match Google's brand more with the colors. And I think the shape is supposed to be an asterisk. But so Google's reasoning for this was a stronger branding for their overall ecosystem and greater consistency between its products. And their reasoning was that when you do it like this, it's easier to find in the App Store or the Play Store, or it stands out as a Google product. So they chose that consistency of the ecosystem instead of the recognizability at that level. And Google can afford to do that because they're a huge brand with a huge user base, and people are, you know, going to keep using Gmail and Google Maps. And at that level, they are able to afford to do that. So when you don't have an advantage of the like that, or you're not sure, consider if you can afford the trade-off. Trade-offs like between consistency and experience, or between the user experience and the business goals. Because sometimes you're designing something or you're building something that might have the most optimal experience and the fastest way to do something, or the most efficient way to do something, but it just doesn't connect with the users because it doesn't fit in with the rest of the overall system, right? The rest of the product, something like that. So consider if you can afford that trade-off. Now, what can designers or builders of these products do? So when I do my project, when I work on my projects, or in general, when we work on projects, we tend to follow uh, a similar design process that looks more or less something like this. You do your research and you try to empathize with the user, and you synthesize all that data, and you get to a problem statement, you identify the problem, and you have multiple ideas, and you begin to prototype that, and then finally you test it with the users, and then you go back. Maybe that gave you more insight, so you go back, or you go back to prototyping or ideating. So what I think we can do here is integrate systems thinking into our process. And I'm not proposing that as an alternative approach or a different process or a method of doing. In fact, I believe a lot of us, consciously or not, might be applying these ideas. But what I think we can do a bit more consciously, if you're not, is maybe before we do all this, expand our horizons and look at the whole picture, the bigger, larger picture, and see what systems are housing the problem that we're trying to solve. And then, look for opportunities, or look for leverage or points where you can, where a design intervention can really help or can really make an impact. And then when you identify those areas, you follow your traditional design thinking process. And then finally, you assess or you evaluate whether it's a sustainable thing. How will it be working over time? Does it um, over time. So, thinking like this is what and allows you to, discover things like the lucky fish, and, think about that you can actually integrate it into their daily schedule, like something like cooking. And then this thing was successful, it works and people are actively using it. So, ask questions, ask lots of questions when you're doing. Ask questions like, what system am I entering? What is the overall context? So you zoom out and you try to see all the different stakeholders and how they're connected and how they're working, and, see the bigger picture of what you're trying to do. And then what is the root cause and why is this actually happening? So try and find out what is the actual reason why something is breaking down or not working. Keep asking why, to find out why that is happening. So instead of just treating the symptoms or the surface level things, try and identify the root cause. And that could be something like even a policy change or something small that could shift the entire system. And then one thing that I think really works is, ask yourself what happens after the 10th use or the 50th use or the 100th use. And this is about lived experience. A lot of the things we're building might be products that people are using in their daily lives over and over again, or as part of their work. So recently we had this thing where we were thinking of adding some sort of instructional element or guide to explain why something was happening in the design, and that helped. But then somebody asked, this is great, but then what happens after the first few times? And that question was really grounding, and it helped us pivot to a better design later. So ask questions like this, and remember, good decisions can fail in isolation. You can have the most optimal, you can, come up with the best design solution. But if it just doesn't work as part of your larger system, then it can still fail. And then, practicing systems thinking allows us to ask better questions and better predict outcomes. And finally, I believe that as designers, we are not simply building interfaces or just building screens or building software or things like that. We are eventually shaping the habits and behaviors of the people that use these products. So remember that. And finally, these are just some fun references that helped me during this, prepare for this talk and inspired me. So one of them is Hooked by Nirayal. He talks about how to build positive habit forming products, and he has this nice thing about habit forming loops. And then Creative Selection by Ken Kosienda. That's about how Apple's design process was during when they were building the iPhone, and it has this beautiful story about how they came up with the first touchscreen phone and autocorrect and all of that. And then if you really like, things like delving deep into things like systems or systems thinking, then you can check out Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows, who is sort of a pioneer in this field. And if you're just, interested and, maybe games are something more of your way, you can check out Mini Motorways. It's just a simple game where you start off with, building roads to connect transport people of a color from one place to another. And then, but over time, this starts to evolve, and that really helps you see scale and things like that. So I thought that would be a fun reference.